Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is November 25, 2025. I want to thank Rob Grant and this amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Please subscribe. Want to welcome today's guest, Charles Hood. Where are you calling from, Charles?
Hey, greetings from the Antelope Valley, east of Los Angeles in the high desert, north and east of Los Angeles. Has the reputation of being kind of a low rent kind of place. Maybe that's why I ended up here. I don't know.
First question is, what's the best thing for a human being?
Joy.
Wow, that's a good word. What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
I am addicted to books. I write books. I read books. I am surrounded by books. For those of you who can see behind me, that's an 11-foot high bookcase. There are 5,000 books in my house. Oh, there's climbing walls on either side. There's no ladder to get to the top. You have to climb up to reach to the top shelf. And the bookcase is bolted to the studs. So if you get off balance, just grab the bookshelf and you'll be fine. It's not gonna, it won't pull down. The house will be the rest of the house will collapse in an earthquake, and that wall and that bookshelf will still be standing. No, I'm a text-based guy. I think Gutenberg was really onto something in terms of a delivery mechanism.
It's really good. Charles, did you become a reader? One, because your parents told you to. Two, they did as an example, or three, on your own?
No, I'm more on my own. I mean, God bless my parents, but there were books in the house, but not really, not many. But when I got a library card, then I was set. And then when I got a bike, so we're looking at like fourth, fifth grade. I also have a bike. I can go to all the libraries in East LA and give them each my name and address and get a library card to the Glendale system and the LA County system and the Los Angeles City system. And there's no quota. Like if you have that many library cards, you'll be able to check out books, endlessly, infinitely, and put them in your little book bag and get them on home. So yes, thank you for I still do events at libraries unpaid because I feel like I've got a lifetime obligation to give back to that system.
I go to the library every day. I appreciate it. And so why do you think humans collect or gather information?
No, it was really useful for us as a species. You think if there's an elephant herd and there's a matriarch who remembers, oh yeah, when all the other water holes dry up, this water hole is likely to, we may have to walk 100 miles, but this water hole is going to work out. So that if the early hominids could think about, well, this is a way that we could survive if we could gather these particular crops or these particular berries in this area, and we remember how to get there kind of distantly or different. Way back in the grandma's era, we got berries here. So accumulating information is what makes us successful as a species.
Really good. You're articulate and concise and smart. I really appreciate it, Charles. Is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
It can be trained to be improved. Certainly, I'm an expert bird watcher. I write books about bird watching anyway, so I know my birds. I've seen 6,000 birds species, and people can be trained to be more observant about birds. People that take their first bird watching, walk in the park and they realize, oh, there were 20 species and I thought there were 3. So we can be improved, but there's an innate ability to gather information and perceive information. I think that's part of the human experience.
Do thoughts create emotions?
Yes, in the sense that our thoughts are part of our the web of consciousness includes thoughts, and the web of consciousness develop emotions. When they say, you only feel bad if they let you feel bad, that's that sort of truism that how we interpret language is causing our negative feelings.
Beautiful. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I
write it. This is an old cliche, but it is true. So if you ask me, what do you think about abortion? Well, it's complicated and messy and, women's rights, but it's sort of nasty that we kill these little babies through no fault of their own. And so if I wrote an essay about abortion, I think I would come up with a more cogent response than I could just give you right now of like, well, it's sort of a bad idea that I want to have happen legally. Legally, I want it, but ethically, I'm not so sure. So how would I write that? Yeah, might take 3,000 words.
Dude, that was really, I loved what you just said there. It's important to me. And it's exactly what Joan Didion said. I don't know what I think until I write it. McLuhan said, I don't know what I think until I say it. Can humans think without language?
Yes. If we think of someone having had extreme brain damage from, an explosion in the Iraq War, or if we think of
Yeah.
someone hypothetically raised outside of culture, or someone who was, God forbid, born deaf and into a tribe that doesn't have sign language, they're going to have to navigate the world in an unlinguistic or anti-linguistic way, as compared to many of your listeners, as compared to you yourself, where you formulate your identity through language and through the words of that language, the diction of that language, the cadence of that language. But obviously, we do have people that are extra lingual for whatever minority, one half of 1% of people that didn't arrive in their humanity through the same language that the rest of us inhabit.
You're a true word crafter. Thank you. So Chomsky says language is not just words. It's a culture, it's a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Charles, what do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
I'm a sad boy. And I'll tell you, speaking as someone who's again, air quote, professional writer, I write every day. I pay people, accumulate my writing on their bookshelves. I'm always looking for language, and it's always that little rabbit that you see, the little cottontail going down the trail and out of view. That's language. And so I'm a sad boy and frustrated boy, but ultimately I can get language to come back, in my case, by reading, by sort of like giving yourself a little dose of language medicine. I take a little shot of language in my arm, and that usually helps bring it back for me.
Wow. Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
We're feeling beings. Just watch people drive.
Yeah.
Oh, you MF, you cut me off. I'm boom, 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 boom. I'm on the 405 freeway. I'm going to get you, sucker.
I think that's a service of cars. Is that you're covered in metal and you can scream, and the person's not really going to attack you in a fist fight in a bar. You're separated. So that's an amazing thing you just said, because Bridget Bardot says, when I make love, I don't think. I'm like, good luck. How do you stop your brain from thinking? Like people meditate, go, now think about not thinking. Or there's a bumper sticker on a car in my street and it says, don't believe everything you think. And I'm like, well, you could say, don't believe everything you feel.
Right. Yeah. Obviously, we have a problem getting outside of ourselves to know when we're too far into ourselves, that strange permeable barrier. But if we just look at how people drive or how they park, obviously they're responding with their emotions, not with their, if they were being logical, they would park more squarely so they could let other cars in around them, because that's good for society. But most people just park like SHIT and they're catty corner because they're, oh, look, I got a parking place. And they zoom in without thinking, like, well, yeah, but you've taken a space and a half. That's not to society's benefit.
Except Waymo's took over Venice, California, and everybody's like hates them, but they have 27 cameras. They're more better drivers than a human being. But my favorite was when the windshield wiper went on. It's like, why do you have to clean the windshield if there's no human in there looking out the window?
Right. Yeah. Maybe it's so we can see in and we're reassured. I don't know if we want to look in. If it's opaque, we're sort of nervous. Like if it's public service. I know when you had Henry Kaiser on like a month ago, and he was anti-Waymo, but I agree with you. There's so many radars and computers on a Waymo that I don't mind if they're coming down the street. I don't feel like the robots are out to get me. I think, there's one car that's not going to hit me. It's that Waymo right there.
Well, these are two from Alan Turing in the 50s. One is thinking a function of the soul.
No, the soul, if there is a soul, it's busy being a soul. And again, I'll say it's extralingual. If we assume that if we're talking by soul, we mean some inherent divinity, that implies something pan-cultural, that in language is always cultural, and society is always, each society is particular to its own language field. So if there is a human soul, it has to be extralingual by definition.
Can machines think?
Not yet, but it's early it's only 2:00 in the afternoon. Ask me at 5.
You have a great sense of humor. That's what we're here to do, is laugh. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I'm on the happiness side. I got to tell you, meaning seems to me that's a lot of hard work. I went to church all my life. Like this idea of theology seems to me hard work and sobriety, and we have to feel bad. And the Calvinists are always examining themselves. Am I worthy? Am I going to heaven? Am I one of the elect? And I don't know. It just seems like hard work. I think I'd rather just have a glass of wine and read a book.
Wow. Because I got it from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. He says that happiness doesn't tend to last and meaning tends to last. What do you think of that?
Well, meaning is giving you happiness, right? You feel secure because you've arrived at some, orientation to the world that makes you feel like you have a place in the world and you're providing value and you're receiving value. So therefore you're happy. Obviously, I feel like I'm receiving value if I'm reading a book. And I'm not harming anybody, so therefore I'm giving value back to society, or I'm becoming smarter, and that's to society's benefit in some distantly vague way.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness?
It has to do both simultaneously.
Yeah.
We know that reality is constructed. We know that simply from linguistics. So if you and I were Romans, we would have a term in our color vocabulary, glaucus, which we would call in modern American English blue-green. We're kind of used to thinking things are blue or green, and then we know there's a blue-green. But glaucus was a real experience to the Romans. It was this sort of grayish, greenish, bluish kind of color. And we have it in modern English in the sense glaucus winged gull, which is sort of a relic use of that language. But they are seeing a different color than you and I would say. Oh, look, you've got a great glaucus robe on there. We love your new tunic. It's so glaucus. was it on sale at Marshall's? So they're creating a reality that's different than my reality. But at the same time, my brain has to create that, but also has to inhabit it and interpret it and project it back out. So it's both sides are happening at the same time.
What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I think the speed of light is at 100,000 miles, a second. We're all pretty good at thinking, but if we just said, give me 5 things that have the color red. Okay, you and I would come up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We could do it in like 2 seconds, 3 seconds, but the speed of light would have been between here and Jupiter by then. So if we're being scientific and we agree that there is such a thing as the speed of light, it's pretty damn fast, and we don't inhabit that kind of reality.
The poet Audre Lorde said, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Her colleague said, yes, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest? And it doesn't have to be tangible.
Who am I to disagree with Audre Lorde of all people? She's my better. But you can dismantle the master's house with the master's tools, right? You can use colonial language to deconstruct colonialism, to give the most literal kinds of, and if you weren't using colonized language, it might be very difficult to communicate even there. If you weren't using some type of colonialized language, even the idea of colonialism is maybe perpetuating colonialism. That fact, you can even talk about it. But if we wanted to invent some new tools, it would be nice if we could transcribe our own speech and examine it prior to it being released into the public. So, like if you send an email, you can in my Gmail, I can retrieve my email in like 3 seconds. There's a little cutoff, right? Do you really want to send that? Like, maybe I forgot my attachment or something. I pull it back. Wouldn't it be interesting if we could somehow, at the speed of light, see the words that we were going to see laid out in like a little subtext? Like, is that really the sequence and the language you want to use? Or do you want to think about that for a little minute before you just put that out there onto the universe? So maybe a little time delay and a transcription service that would be instantaneous. So you and I would still have a conversation, but I have pre-vetted my words so I don't sound like quite the white jerk that I probably am.
Dude, that was really amazing because you're a good listener. Most people kind of go, well, I don't want to use the word new. And, I'll say imagination is the tool, because really, when I clarify the question, I say, well, I'm really asking you, what tool do you most gravitate towards? And so then you would say, I'm not saying you would, but yours is language in a lot of ways. You've expounded on that so well, but there's many tools, there's many tools that you use, but the one that you took out of my question was the word new. And so that's interesting because I do that in my Zooms. I didn't know this since I started COVID Zooming. I didn't know you can hit a little button on the bottom of Zoom and it transcribes immediately. And
Right. Yeah.
it's amazing. I was like blown away at how fast it is. It isn't delayed. And so that's amazing tool that you talked about. I appreciate that. And then when I asked people about a tool, one person said, "Well, what about a toy?" So what's a toy you gravitate towards?
I literally gravitate towards little Hot Wheel cars when I'm stuck writing and I need something to like get myself going. I have, and then people gift them to me, my kids, and just now that I put that in an essay, so now my fans send me cars too. But I'll just pull out my desk drawer and I've got, the Hot Wheel cars really roll easily. There's no
Oh yeah,
friction, and they all have kind of exaggerated engines and little flared, air scoops in back. So they talk to my 7th grade self. And so I don't make too many zooming noises, but maybe in my head I'm going zoomity, zoomity. But just the tactile way the car rolls across the desk is very liberating for me, and very, it creates enough distraction that maybe my brain can get back on track to generate some more language.
when you said 7th grade self, it reminded me of my friend was saying, what era of science fiction writers were the golden era, the 20s, the 40s, the 60s, the 80s? And he goes, when you're a teenager, when you're in 7th grade. And I was like, that's for a lot of our tastes are formed when we're teenagers. Music, books, so much,
And cars, for the car that you want to buy when you go into your golden middle age, and you buy your 68 Camaro for a certain generation, although it's going to be
Yeah.
80s hot hatchbacks for people a little bit younger than me.
Yeah. And so what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I'm like everybody else. I have a hard time turning my brain off, but there's just, even if I think, oh, I have an answer to that line I couldn't finish in my essay, and I have to leap up and run down. I sleep upstairs, run down the stairs, and go to my office and turn the computer on. Like that's the line right there. I've got it. And of course, it's probably shite. I think I've got it, but I probably really don't. So in the morning, I'll be like, why did you get up out of bed and walk all the way down here and agitate the dogs just for that? That's not really much of a line for all the whole 20 minutes that it took you to get all that effort out.
Charles, you're a fun dude. I appreciate this a lot. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So I ask you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Well, you're making some assumptions there. First of all, we're assuming the artists are broadcasting on the right frequency and they're broadcasting the truth.
Yeah.
There's a way of valorizing art that says, artists are inherently more sensitive or inherently more, they're tuned to the wisdom of the spirits. But as much as I love Ezra Pound, and I will say so I'll go on record here. Hello, everybody. Ezra Loomis Pound had the best ear of any writer since Shakespeare. I'm making that as a statement. But he was a fascist and a nutcase and cheated. He's the one that had two when he was arrested by the partisans at the end of World War II for treason. He was living in Italy. He was arrested with his wife and his mistress in the same house because they didn't have enough money to have separate houses. And his 2 kids were not there because he had farmed them out. One girl was up on a farm in the Alps. Like his kids were treated abominably badly. So as much as I'm saying Ezra Loomis Pound, he's got the great ear. You should really read the piece on cantos, his great poetic masterpiece. I'm not going to turn to Ezra Pound for advice about anything because
but the beauty is, Charles, you can suss that out because I spoke with the guy who writes for the Wall Street Journal, and he's a great writer and a very smart man. And when I said that, he just said, I won't believe anything Pound says. Now, sometimes I sense that early on, and I just say, a poet said that artists.
Yeah. Right.
Elitist. I'm not trying to sound elitist. I'm just saying some writers broadcast something that's a little deeper, and some people ignore the message.
Right,
That's really
right. Yeah.
the essence of what I'm asking is, why do people sometimes ignore some of these messages?
Because I'll use the language you used initially with me is you said the hidden messages or the hidden truth, right?
Hidden
And therefore, by
sacred.
definition, if it's hidden, it's not being broadcast in a way that's communicable. So we'll take Ezra Pound as our example. So he helps T.S. Eliot edit The Wasteland, the poem that became
Yeah.
The Wasteland, published in 1922, greatest poem in the last 100 years, blah, 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 edited by Pound and made into what it was by Pound. But to read The Wasteland is a fairly sophisticated reading experience. You can't really pick it up, even though it was genius in how it showed fragmentation and the loss of spirituality, and it incorporated voices from the common man, air quote common man, even though it was really polyvocal in ways that are beloved today and common today in pastiche writing. But no one knew how to read it in 1922. The readership of T.S. Eliot, it was all of 40 people who could read the dial where it was published, so I'm sure there are things that are really brilliant happening in art, and I'm too old and too white to get what these people are, trying to share with me. And I hope my kids get it, or, I hope some critic gets it in time to explain it to me so I can get it through that, lens.
Yeah, like Harold Bloomer. Here's the McLuhan line. I'd love to hear just a quick follow-up. He said, you can't write the great American novel because the front page of the newspaper is the great American novel.
But even the great American novel is predicated on the idea that a single white man is going to create a work of literature that's somehow going to define a generation, and I'm not, we could actually say, why isn't it a collective of Latina lesbian women who are creating the great American opera? Why does it have to be I hate privileging fiction over poetry. Like, why is it always a novel? Why wasn't T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland the great American novel?
Yeah.
Been there, done that. He was American. He took a British citizenship later on, lived in London, but he was born in St. Louis, so he's as American as any. Pound is born in Idaho. They're perfectly American people. So why a novel? Why American? Why the great American novel?
Right. No, you're really making a good point, because you cosmically nailed it. It should be called the GAP, the Great American Poem. So the gap is the in-betweenness, the resonating interval, and that's why McLuhan said the gap is where the action is, and he wasn't talking about the clothing store.
Yeah, right. And even the idea that there's going to be one, why can't it just be the great American novels, plural? At any given year, we'll say these are the 10 that are really doing it right now for us, and in 10 years there'll be a different 10, but that's fine.
Yeah, but I kind of revamped McLuhan. I said you can't write the great American novel because the great American novel is the thumbnail sketch on YouTube videos. So that's, Pound's family finally reveals what he did to T.S. Eliot. That's
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So we go on. Ahead. No, you go on.
Okay.
It's your show.
Charles, do artists have moral obligation?
Yes, but I'll define moral pretty broadly, and that is to be trying to create better art than they know how to create. That is your obligation as an artist. Yeah. I don't want the plumber to try to plumb better than he can plumb. Just fix the plumbing and be done. But for artists, you should be trying to paint, sing, write better than you know how, and that is, you have a moral obligation to extend your artistic vision to the very limits of what your soul can create.
Yeah.
And shame on you if you're just turning out crap. And it's crap. Thomas Kincaid, we're talking to you.
From the great. But dude, that is amazing, because I rarely get criticism, and I welcome it and want it. But I want constructive criticism. Say, you suck. You use the same questions every time. Whatever. I says, okay, I hear it. Give me. I mean, it's hard to get constructive criticism, and I appreciate it when I do. But this one woman whose dad was really a famous writer, and she wrote, and I had an interview with her, and then she wrote back to me and said, you did this wrong and you did that wrong. I was like really impressed that she took the time to write it. But the end of her email, she said 2 words. She said, do better. And I goes, dude, that made me feel like she was loving me and really respecting me, and said the 2 words you said, do better. That's what I want to do, is do better. So that was really good. The moral obligation is to do better. Be-
And to do better than you know how to do right now. I mean,
right,
yeah,
right.
you know what you want. You don't even know how to get there. It's the
Yeah,
striving to do that.
yeah. It's unlearning. Okay, so it goes along to this. You got ESP. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I'm afraid of harmful ideas, and there are
Yeah,
plenty of old ideas that are coming back around. I
yeah.
thought, so hello, audience. I'm an old guy. I thought I was past a lot of things in my society that have come back up. Like, really, we're gonna use these words on these people? Like,
Yeah,
really, really?
yeah.
I never thought in my lifetime I would have to relive the 1950s in this kind of narrative way that the presidential, coterie is using. So ideas are either good or bad depending on what they do for society, how they can encourage us to live better, more fuller lives.
I appreciate that because it's me and you versus the wording on the questions. We're psychoanalyzing the verbs and the nouns, and that's what I like when people say, "I'm going to change your word." The harmful ideas. Thank you. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Yeah, it's because it was so vivid. My earliest memory that I'm aware that I have is of John F. Kennedy's funeral, and because they had horses, they had the riderless horse in the funeral,
Yeah.
and as a 3.5-year-old or something, I knew what a horse was. And my parents were poor, but we did have a little black and white TV somehow. I don't know how they ever afforded that, but we did have a TV, and so I saw Kennedy's funeral procession, and maybe my parents were responding to it. So I was keyed off of their emotional intensity.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I think it would be easier not to remember very much. Wouldn't you be a better husband or wife? And again, not to be heteronormative about this, but you'd be a better spouse or a better partner if you didn't remember 3 years ago you said that one thing to me, and I still remember that, and and you said you were going to fix that faucet, and you never did.
The joke remind me of is, and you could say the wife or the husband runs into the hospital and the spouse is dying, and they have the VCR under their arm, and they go, "Wait, before you die, which button do I push again?"
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So in my household, my wife controls all the streaming services. Like, I don't have the passwords, I don't have the account. I don't know how to use a remote because I just sit down on the sofa and she plays it for me. So she's been traveling, and I wanted to watch a documentary on Netflix. I am so proud that I got the TV on and I got to my channel so I can see my little documentary all by my grown-up self, and I didn't have to text her or nothing. Yay!
That is great. She trained you well. Okay, so tell me someone within your immediate family who had an impact on you, and what was the impact?
Well, I've published a book recently about my father was in World War II, and it didn't do him a lot of good, really, to be honest. And so he came out of the war, what we would say now PTSD, although we didn't have any words for it. And so he was violent at times and unkind at times and troubled at times. But he was a hard worker. My dad grew up in the Depression, and then he went to the war. And so he never took a sick day. He was in that generation. You just went to work. You didn't complain.
Yeah.
You manned up or you cowboyed up. He'd even had been a cowboy at one point. And I carried that work ethic with me. And so I was a professor and I got sick leave, but I never used it. And so when I retired, I had 1.5 years of accumulated sick leave. So you can say I'm an idiot because I didn't ever take a fun day, but also I got paid for all those days. They went into my retirement account. I got paid for 1.5 years of extra service. So he gave me a work ethic that I really admire. Even at the same time, he came out of the war unable to talk about what was truly bugging him. He was in the Navy, and I recreated his naval service by going across the Pacific on a ship and realizing, okay, this is where his spirit broke when this particular kamikaze killed his best friend, blah, 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 blah. And in reaching that as an adult, I could really see who he was. He had never been able to articulate what the significance was of his harm and even express it as harm.
It reminded me of, sometimes I ask people where you get your work ethic, but 95% from my parents. And the funny thing is about the third paragraph down on work ethic in Wikipedia. It says, this could be a scam from consumer culture.
Shut up and go to work. But I don't know. I just gave a talk to undergraduate students who were asking sort of for job advice. They're about to graduate college, and I gave a little talk, and I said, "Say please and thank you, show up
Yeah.
on time."
Yeah.
And all I can say is, my dad didn't graduate college. I was living in my car when I started graduate school. I mean, I grew up poor, but I did show up on time, and I was really reasonably polite and respectful. And hard work pays off. I don't, at least it has in my life and my kids' life. So, yeah, I'm the advocate of don't stop complaining and just do something. Just show up and do it.
That's it. Same question, Charles. Outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact, and what was the impact?
Oh, I was lucky that I got mentored by some lovely teachers. I wasn't going to go to college. I dropped out of college 9 times. I got married young, so I would work and try to keep body and soul together, and then I'd go back to school for a while, and then I'd work again for a while. But I was really fortunate. I was at Cal State Northridge, just a regular suburban 4-year college in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles, and I had an English teacher who was being my mentor on some poetry projects, and he said, "Well, have you ever thought about graduate school?" And I said, "That sounds good. What's graduate school?" I knew vaguely the term, I guess, but like, what is graduate school and why would I go? And for those, for our listeners, if you go to the good graduate schools, they waive your tuition. If you go to the good graduate schools, they give you a teaching job, which pays badly compared to professors, but pays better than being, a factory worker, which I was. And so he said, "Have you thought about graduate school?" And then I got into UC Irvine, which at the time was harder to get into than Harvard Medical School. It's really quite a prestigious program back in the day. And there I learned, oh, this is where the money is. This is where the rich people are, because some of the students were quite wealthy and someone who really had privileged upbringing, and like, oh, so this thing where I worked my way through college. I had a morning job. I took classes in the afternoon, and then I had a night job. I didn't have to do that. There's actually a better way. Like, have people give you money for nothing. So I'd fill out, like my first summer, I needed a job, filled out a little piece of paper. "Oh, here, we'll give you some money to go work on your book. What's going to become your thesis and your first book, which I'll have to get your first job. We'll give you money to research that book. What do I have to do? Oh, just go be smart. Just go research it, write a little 1-page report when you get back at the end of the summer, and here's your money." Like, oh, I'm loving on this. This was where was this life? Oh, my parents didn't know anything about this. They thought you had to go to work and do something nasty to have people give you money. And all I had to do was fill out a little piece of paper. "Hello, I have a research project. I'd like to apply to the Graduate Research Fund. Please, thank you very much."
Beautiful.
So,
Wow.
so that's all thanks to Ben Saltman. I want to give his name, the late Ben Saltman, a poetry teacher at Cal State Northridge. Thank you for being my mentor and being kind to me and showing me that I had some promise. So thank you very much.
Really good. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Yeah, I went to church every Sunday. First Hollywood Presbyterian. It's still there. You can see it it's a red brick Gothic tower. You can see off of Gower Street on the Hollywood Freeway. If you're heading to downtown Los Angeles, it's on your right. From preschool till college, I went to college. I went to Presbyterian church every Sunday, faithfully. Except on vacation, we didn't go to church. We were allowed a little break then. But otherwise, every Sunday I'd be at church. Dressed up, little clip-on tie, my white shirt, proper little Christian boy. And
do you pray?
Sometimes I'm not sure to whom I'm speaking, I'll be honest, but it can be a good way to get, like, I don't go to church at this moment, but the community church I used to go to here in my town, I would go to the altar rail to take communion, but I would just stop and pray in the sense of asking the universe, can I be a better person? And whether I'm praying to Jesus on the cross or to Buddha or to Allah, inshallah, I don't know. I'm praying to whoever's listening at that particular moment, whoever he or she is, and I'm asking for some grace, and I'm asking to become more grace giving. And I think that's real. The church became homophobic and problematic. I couldn't attend that congregation, but I think the act of devotion that I was expressing, that was good for my blood pressure, good for my community service. Yeah, I think so.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Well, you didn't fuck it up too badly. Could have done a whole lot better, dude, but I've seen worse.
Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Well, it's the end result is the same, right? Wherever the evil came from, it's in those people, and they're busy walking around eviling on all the rest of us pretty hardcore.
Well, the hidden question really is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, Charles, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
That's not true. They're going to be empowered by lots of external things, their job, the other friends they have or enemies that they have. I can say that person X is oppositional to me, and that doesn't enhance their power. I think that merely either speaks the truth to those around me. They understand, oh, that's why you don't like so and so. You're oppositional to them. Ignoring them is really unhealthy psychologically. We know this. Like, you can repress like crazy, but that's where illness comes from, and that's where nightmares come from, and that's where repeated behavior comes from for those of us that were beaten by our parents because they were beaten by their parents. Like, can we just break that whole chain of behavior by saying, I don't like it when you act like that, and I plan not to act like that myself, you know?
Yeah. So Nassim Taleb said games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. Gregory Bateson says, when the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he say, hey, I did something morally and socially wrong? Basically, you can go wherever you want, but the basic question is, does punishment work?
Sure, punishment works. If my dog's trying to run out the front door, I have 2 dogs, and they're not obedient. They won't come back if they run out the front door. So if they try to run out the front door, no, I smack them on the tail and give them a no, and they learn don't run out the front door, and then therefore they're not going to get hit by a car. So punishment does work. But for complex human problems, does putting someone in jail work? Usually not, judging by recidivism rates, right? So we know historically that treating their addictions or giving them some access to power through, whether it's through a poetry workshop or whether through learning a craft, that's much more likely to result in positive behavior down the line. So yeah. Limited punishment works. I'm afraid of getting a speeding ticket because they're so expensive. So I speed, but only up to a certain point. If there were no cops giving speeding tickets, you can bet I'd be flaming on the freeway. I've got a fast car right now. I'd be flaming along, but fear of punishment keeps me in moderate restraint.
There you go. Good examples. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Because the play and the movie are abstracting life in a way that's very useful for us. It makes life visible or legible. And that would include moral dilemmas. That might include patterns of behavior. By abstracting it and making it simplified, it is true that any play and any tree in any movie is not as interesting as a real tree. There's no insects in it. There's no shadow. Blah, blah, blah. But it's also true that if I see a movie about trees, I may understand the role of a forest better than if I'm just seeing a tree in my yard, which is relatively mute. I mean, I could bring to that tree my own narrative because in my case, I know a lot about trees, but really the tree isn't really giving me that much. But an artist who's great at making tree movies can then elevate my sense of what a tree can be through the movie, through her or his movie is. Art works. Anyone who's cried at a play or cried at a movie, art works.
It does. It's a beautiful 2 words. So walk us through, Charles, your tipping points. I mean, mainly you're so many things, and I look up to you for all your pursuits. You're a naturalist and a poet. So what was the tipping point where you said, I want to be a writer, that's my calling, and the tipping point where I want to be a naturalist, that's my calling?
Society's been rewarding me. So I wasn't going to go to college. I did go to college. I was working while in college, and I thought I was going to be a history major. I like history. It seems to me relevant still. But in my English classes, I could get a higher grade for less work. And in fact, to be honest, y'all, I could get an A on a paper without having read the book, just because I have whatever gift of bullshit that I have. And so suddenly it's like, oh, I should be an English major. If I'm going to work 54 hours a week and I don't have time to do the homework, I better become whatever package the university wants me to become for the least amount of effort. So I became an English major that particular kind of way. So I'm getting rewarded by that. And nature makes you happy. Nature makes me happy. And then nature was giving me a little bit of money. It still does. You don't get that much money as a poet as for all you readers. If I publish a poetry book, I might win $1,000 for the poetry prize, and then I might get a royalty check for $100 in 10 years or something. But I can make twice that or 10 times that with a nature book. So society wants books about birds. Society really doesn't want me to write many more poetry books. I mean, I can, but if I write a bird watching book, it's gonna do better. I wrote Wild LA. I was the lead author on Wild LA, and that's gone through 4 printings. It's got a 4.9 rating on Amazon. It's been read by thousands and thousands of people. So nature is a way to reach an audience, and nature is a way to get a little bit of power and leverage for other projects. I can do less successful projects because I did that one.
Really good, Charles. This question, let's go with poetry for a couple minutes here. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. When you're writing a Charles poem, it's not an assignment, it's not a commission or anything. You're just writing a Charles poem. What role does intention play in your creative process?
I can have all the intention I want, but what the audience might get might be very different from what I intended for them to get, either for better or for worse. The poem might be better received than it deserves to be, or perhaps maybe it's misperceived. I'm very suspicious of authorial intention, in a broad sense. Kubrick as an auteur, as the author. What Kubrick was trying to do in 2001, or what they're trying to do in Apocalypse Now, Francis Ford Coppola was trying to do. I really don't care. What matters is, did it work? Is it interesting on the screen in this particular case, or on the page? Pound was intending to reinforce a fascist economic theory. Luckily, he was so far off his mark that the poems survive anyway. And in fact, they're usually interesting for something other than what he was intending to do philosophically or morally.
Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your reader, your potential reader, when you're writing your poem?
In a poem, I am a little bit aware of audience, because you're going to send it to a journal or to an editor, or you're going to submit it to a contest or something. There's very little you can do these days that doesn't have to think about where you're going to submit it at some point, your venue at some point. But then if I'm writing nonfiction, I have a little bit more refined sense of audience. And usually my sense of audience and the publishers are a little bit mismatched. I don't wish to speak poorly of my publishers or my editors. God bless you, all of you, for putting up with me. But often I think I can push the audience farther than you think they're willing to go. And to give a practical example, I'm a big fan of using fine art in my natural history books, that actually reveals something about our relationship to nature. And I also believe in using pop culture and references to cars, literally sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I believe it belongs in my nature writing. And most of my readers seem to agree. And most of my editors are like, I don't know. So here's a true story. This is honest to gosh. I'm working on book X for publisher X. I won't embarrass them by saying who. And I was told at a meeting, I was shooting the photography and doing some of the writing, you don't have enough nature porn in this submission portfolio for this chapter. And that was the exact word, and they meant it literally. And what they meant was, Bambi and the sunrise. And I had been shooting the LA River, and I had included unhoused people's encampments in the back. Like, and I had a great blue heron perched on a shopping cart. And I was told, absolutely no effing way are you putting a shopping cart in the LA River in our book. No one will buy it. And do you want to be paid? Do you want to be published? Shut up and do as you're told, Hood. Who do you think you are? And actually, I think I'm right. And I've, you talk to audiences, or I do a slideshow. And the reality is we do have unhoused people living in natural areas, and they are interacting with nature in ways that you have to be aware of as a bird watcher, for example. You want to watch about safety, and you want to think about you're trespassing in someone's front yard necessarily if you're bird watching here. So I disagree strongly with this idea that nature is just this narrow little box. But I heard the lesson, like, you're not going to get published unless you bring out some nature. Next meeting, I'll lay out the nature porn. We'll have Bambi there. Hello, I'm the centerfold Bambi.
Dude, you are my hero. So McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. Like knife and fork extends our teeth. Shutter in a camera extends our eyelid. Maybe even non-tangible, say religion or philosophy, extends consciousness. What does the writing utensil extend for you? Whether it's a pen or a keyboard, what humanness does it extend?
I really think, and your readers, your viewers are going to maybe disagree with me. I actually think our culture, our society, our experience is shaped by the sound of the words our home language provides. And so for us, in speaking contemporary American English, we have something that is Anglo-Saxon in its root origins, and then of course had French laid over it, and then of course became a colonial language. And we adopted all these words from the language from the people we colonized. But at our root core English-speaking selves, we respect and trust blunt, harsh CK words. So if
Yeah.
you're mad at someone, you use the F word. And so I'll just, I can say I perambulated through bovine dischargings or I stepped in bullshit. And we always prefer the direct, the honest, the harsh, that kind of sound. And
Yeah.
so what I'm doing as an author is trying to push us into the harder, more blunter, more monosyllabic. I love spondies, which is two stresses, one after the other. And then pull it back and maybe have a little bit softer cadence and a little bit more mellifluous cadence, which is to say a little bit more Latinate cadence. So the tool I'm using is expressing my thought, and my thought is navigating between our heritages, between the Anglo-Saxon and the sort of Latinate, Norman, French part of our culture too, and then with all these great, sexy, strange words that we picked up along the way, coyote, or chocolate. These words that came out of the New World experience. The word atoll from the Maldivian islands, like we everywhere English went, we stole their souls, their gold, their women, and their language. And so we have this great 2 million word language that's just bursting with all these textures and all these subtle flavors that we as writers, we as readers get to enjoy. But behind all of that, or beneath all of that, is an Anglo-Saxon blunt cadence where really, this is just straight Lord of the Rings kind of, Ride of the Rohirrim kind of, ride now, ride for Gondor, says J.R. Tolkien. And he's just recreating an Anglo-Saxon battle epic in reasonably quasi 20th century modern English via his World War I trench experience.
Yeah, this is, I go to etymology online 5-6 times a day, maybe even more. I want to know where the word came from. And my favorite is where it goes, of unknown origin.
Right.
Every word is of unknown origin. But then
Right.
I found out the coolest words are usually from the back alleys of London, spoken by the hoodlums. And they the coolest words, or some of the coolest words. So, what's the function of poetry?
To delight and to instruct, what everybody says. If you're not getting something from reading it, I think tactile in our mouths and our senses and if my fingertips are not tingling, then all the intellectual weight behind that doesn't matter. I need to come at it through a tactile, visceral reaction. I could be responding negatively, but I need to feel like I'm getting something. You think of late T.S. Eliot, he's highly Christianized in the four quartets, but there's just such magnificent, gorgeous language there that, irrespective of what you feel about his his Anglican religion, nonetheless, the language is just undeniably worth listening to, worth touching, worth inhabiting, and that's a river you want to swim in for a long, long, long time. And then, if you're in that river, maybe you'll take his Christianity seriously and debate his theology.
I kind of like Rex Ross said, the purpose of poetry is to woo your lover and subvert the bourgeois.
And he's exactly, and he's going to be open to like doing poetry with saxophones and having a more beat experience. One of the problems with like T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound is they were influenced by the Victorians. So if you hear recordings of them reading, they sound terrible. They're very stilted. Oh dear, here comes the poem. They're very elevated as opposed to Rex Roth, where he's like, let's just make it a jazz happening. Let's get that beat going down and just beat it out with beat poetry.
That's like a beat poet, but more so nature poet, Gerry Snyder. My task as a poet entails the work of seeing the world without language and then bringing that seeing into language.
Yeah, I would just, as much as I'm fond of Mr. Snyder, and he blurbed my first book when I was a wee little wet thing, wet that just I wrote him a cold, I cold called him with in a letter, and he wrote me a blurb for my first book. So God bless Gary Snyder, and I played frisbee with his kids, and I love to quote, you know, uh, his poetry, but I'm not sure he's ever going to be able to leave language. And particularly him, he knows 10 languages, right? He's the one that knows he can translate Japanese haiku from Japanese because he's so fluent in it. So yeah, you getting beyond language in a way that an animal is. Oh, come on, Mr. Snyder. That's pretty, I admire your Paleolithic origins on that one, but they had language in the Paleolithic too.
Charles, the three T's of music, my friend claims, are technique, theory, and taste. Technique, you learn how to do it. Theory, or you learn the technique, you learn the theory, the structure. How does one acquire taste?
Reading. Reading,
yeah,
or performing, or listening, right?
yeah.
You go to hear the LA Philharmonic, to pick my favorite local symphony. You hear them 100 times, and you're going to realize everyone applauded when this thing happened. That was pretty good. Or everyone got electric.
Yeah.
The audience went electric, right, when that thing happened. Oh wow, that's something to pay attention to. What were they responding to?
Yeah. This is McLuhan on song, but it's on music. But I'm curious because it seems as though you almost said this line in describing poetry just a minute ago. McLuhan said, "Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical tastes is ultimately connected to language difference." So when you talked about the extension of the humanness, this writing utensil, a sound of words, I was wondering if that's similar to what you were talking about, or can you expound at all on that?
I think that many of us default to a particular attunement. Few of us are really great with music and with language and with dance and with sports, and right, but there are some things that you just are good at. And I'm going to give a quick example. I wasn't there for this, but I heard about this. So two members of the San Francisco Symphony are in Nepal waiting for their airplane to go home. So they're professional musicians, and there's a woman whose child has died, and she is keening with grief. I'll use the literary phrase, keening with grief. And one musician turns to the other musician and says, "Perfect pitch."
Wow.
Now, he is, I think, so I've got a part two of that, doing what the poet Busan did. So Buson, a Japanese haiku master. Busan had hired a worker to come to his house and do some work. And he said in a poem, "The mason's finger bleeds near azaleas." And what I think the poem is saying, the mason's finger, the stoneworker, he's cut himself. He's bleeding by the. I think what he's saying is, I'm a jerk. I looked at the red on red colors, the blood on the azaleas, and I was struck by the color before I went to get a bandage. Now, a truly empathetic person would be, the mason's finger bleeds. I ran and got a bandage, or I called 911, I did whatever, right? And I think it's a poem about self-criticism. I noticed the color, and then I got a bandage. So I think the two musicians story, I think they would be aware. That's not a very empathetic thing to say she has perfect pitch, but they cannot not hear perfect pitch. As opposed to me, I can't, on pitch and off pitch, I've got very clumsy ears on that, but I do hear one word next to another word with a great degree of acuity, that there's then versus than, which lots of beginning writers can't, E and A, but to my mind, they're just immense. They're as far apart as Neptune from Venus. Like, they're just, how could you even begin to get those? They come from different histories, and they have different sounds in your mouth, and they produce. And so I'm hyper attuned to perfect pitch in language, and hyper bugged when people misuse language. But I appreciate there are other people that would notice a great basketball layup, which I'm kind of clumsy about, clumsy at noticing. Oh, it's a double, triple, or a triple double, whatever they say, when the guy's at the halfway point and throws the ball through the net at the last minute. Everyone goes crazy. Like, okay, I don't quite get something going on there, but I get that everyone else knows. So we have our little antennas. We have our little skills.
Yeah. Louis Bersani, the poet critic, was discussing Mallarmé, the symbolist poet. Said the very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic compositions. Any thoughts?
Oh, this is, the crisis of the idea of crisis, and that we have to be in extremis, and you should be starving to be an artist, and you should be in opposition to the society. This is a cultural choice or a cultural preconception, and certainly after Mallarmé, the modernists who were responding to Mallarmé would certainly feel you have to be oppositional to your dominant culture. I'm not so sure that we couldn't be just perfectly happy and content and not be oppositional and still write good. Gary Snyder is oppositional philosophically, but he's not necessarily as confrontational as a lot of the other beats.
Yeah.
And so I nothing against Mr. Mallarmé, Stéphane Mallarmé, and nothing against Rambo and everybody else. But really, do you always have to be pissing on the bourgeoisie? As a member of the bourgeoisie, it's actually kind of nice to have a roof over my head and money to pay the electrical bill.
There's a great Warhol line I love to repeat. There's nothing more bourgeois than dissing the bourgeois.
Yeah, right. He was not afraid. He'd grown up poor. He wasn't afraid to make money. He was happy.
What was the motive of the cave artist?
I went to Cheveau Cave Replica. Like, I take cave art very seriously. I think it's just astoundingly prescient and astoundingly, it's the way I can see what animals were like that are now extinct. And there is a dominant and still present strain of argument that says they were reenacting some type of holy ritual or some type of spiritual ritual. And if you go to, so there's a replica, the greatest cave is Cheveau Cave, and if you can go to a replica in the south of France and take the little tour, and they're very big on the spiritual element of it. And I am less convinced. We don't know their language. We don't know their material culture very well. We don't know their mental culture. So to extrapolate our beliefs about primitivism and spirituality on and extrapolate and enforce that on them, I'm very hesitant about that. And all I'll say is Paleolithic cave artists had an extraordinarily accurate sense of what animals were, and they were so accurate in their memory, they were able to replicate that animal on the cave wall with relatively difficult circumstances. They're under, it's a flickering little lamp made out of fat, and they've got this rough surface, and they've just got ochre, and yet the horses feel individual. They they look alert. The lions look alert. I mean, it's just their ability to notice nature is just at the highest of human achievement to my mind. So were they being spiritual? Sure, maybe. Maybe they were just hungry and they're drawing horses because they wanted to eat a horse. Like, I don't need. Maybe they just liked. Maybe those were the guys that like drawing. I mean, I like writing. People like drawing. So I'm going to go draw a horse because I like drawing, and I'm going to draw it inside the cave because that's where it won't wash away in the rainstorm.
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
I'm a fan of compromise, and I think that people that want to make effective political decisions have to be willing to reach an audience, reach a politician, reach a compromise. And then that's how the land will get set aside much more often than simply saying, set this land aside or we're going to torch you down and not speak to you ever again, kind of thing. I've joined my fair share of causes over the years. And there's a little group of trees called the Hood Grove in San Joaquin Marsh in Orange County that we put up in the dark and we watered. We were trying to keep a building from coming in. And so we put these trees here and said, look, there's an oak grove. You can't put it in your building. Look at the oak grove. But really, we planted the trees ourselves. They didn't grow there from time immemorial. And I watered them every day. And, so that was an act of opposition, but it wasn't open defiance. And officially, it was like, oh, I'm happy to have a meeting with the university staff because I want to hear your perspective. And then if you'll just let me, I'd like to show you my perspective and then ultimately try to get the goal that I'm hoping to get.
You've accomplished a lot. How do you rate these three elements, luck, skill, and ambition? What played the biggest role, second and third?
Luck. There's so many ways I could have died or failed or missed the lecture or, had someone read my application on the wrong day. I mean, speaking as someone who's been on hiring committees and someone who's, awarded scholarships, sometimes the committee is just in a pissy mood for whatever reason. And God help the people that apply on that day. So I have been to the South Pole as an artist in residence, which is like 1 person in 100 gets to go when Trump hasn't actually canceled the program completely, when it's actually running. And I was lucky that I got there on the day they were reading the applications with a generous mood. but it's also true I was very careful in how I pitched myself, and I took the time to research and ask people for advice and to show rough drafts around. So it's luck and skill, and I had to have the ambition to think, well, maybe they would take me. I kind of doubted it. I thought, well, I'm not really nothing, but maybe they will. So I had enough ambition at least to apply.
T.S. Eliot said poetry's outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
It's in good, good American slang-filled bad word English. That's the narrative in my head, and I can't get away from. I could sight read a little bit of French or German or something, and I learned how to speak another language to translate poetry for the Fulbright program. I was at one time very fluent in Tokpisin, Tokpisin, the trade language of Papua New Guinea. I was good enough to translate in that, but the language in my head is good slangy American English, infinitely robust, infinitely dynamic. So says me.
Right on, dude. So two of my film heroes say, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas, there's no self-expression. In fact, Cecil Taylor, jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making more self-expression or more your vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
I don't believe people who say they don't have a self, particularly if they're a really good musician. I just find that, the music just played itself. Then why were you sitting at the piano right at that particular moment? Why not just Wino, walk in off the street, Mr. Wino, and sit at this piano because the piano's about to play itself, and that music will just pour through your Wino hands. Like, of course it came through yourself. You had an ear for music. You had an ear for Charlie Parker. You've been practicing all these years. You may not consciously be thinking, I'm about to play this particular sequence, but all your training, all your selfhood allowed that sequence to happen. And God bless us, because the rest of us are better for it, Mr. Jazz musician, genius person.
Can art making be egoless?
Yes. I have a painting painted by an elephant. I kind of like it. I'm not saying it's great art, but it's an interesting juxtaposition of colors. I mean, someone had to give the elephant the paint and the brush, so I guess there's some humanity in there. And I would like to think that, there's times I suppose people are just about to pass out, blackout drunk, and they're scribbling, Charles Bukowski or whomever, and they wrote something that actually wasn't bad, despite their inebriation. But I'd have to say most of the time you're inhabiting a different space. You should have some skill. You should have some awareness. You should have some intentionality.
The Fluent Pro Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, kind of saying the artist dream awake. And not to sound elitist, but everybody has these amazing scenarios they can create in the middle of the night, but artists can also create them while they're awake. And again, it's not to sound elitist but it's just your thoughts on, have dreams played a role in your creative process writing your poetry?
Yeah, I keep a dream journal. If I remember something really interesting, more just to document, wow, my brain was worried about that. That's interesting. Things that are nothing to do with my real life, that are just, I'm writing an elephant in the ocean or whatever it's going to be. The problem with Finnegan's Wake and the problem with James Joyce is anything he says about that book, by the time he's writing that book, he knows he's going to be famous. He knows he is famous, and he's, kind of speaking to posterity. And it's like, well, can you just cut the bullshit and just talk to me directly and stop talking, like he's speaking in quotation marks because he knows it's going to be written down, and he's going to try to write a book that's just impossibly surreal because he thinks that's interesting, that he's going to challenge the critics, So Finnegan's Wake, which is just the side of unreadable, is really an act of masturbation and not really an attempt to reach an audience. So whatever you thought about Finnegan's Wake, James Joyce, I don't care. Tell me what you thought about Portrait of an Artist or Dubliners or something you were writing before you were famous, then I'm actually more likely to want to have that conversation with you.
Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Yes, I believe that we're going to have a better political climate. It's just, we're in a temporary, for survival, I have to think this is a temporary deviation from a long-term standard, mean.
Yeah.
And Lewis Carroll is problematic because one of the possibilities he was thinking about was some type of romantic attachment with very young children. And so his impossibility was a sexual impossibility. He couldn't even, he might have been there's a lot of speculation, how gay was he and how much of a pedophile was he? And like, we now have access to manifestations of our sexuality that are much more diverse than anything the Victorians felt it comfortable inhabiting. So his impossibilities are no longer our impossibilities. And the idea, that you could write a fanciful book and that he'd be shocked at how, enduring Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass really are. That would shock him. So thank you for opening up those possibilities, Lewis Carroll. And yeah, he believes, I'm sure he had a fanciful life. What his impossibilities are, I'm not quite so sure. They might have been kind of limited, not much of an impossibility, sort of a very possible impossibility in his case.
Charles, tell me one major element of your creativeness that stayed the same and one major element that's changed in the years you've been being creative.
So I published 22 or 23 books. I've got 2 books coming out in the next 2 years, roughly speaking, and I've got proposals for more. I keep hard copy journals, sketchbooks, and they've got cartoons and drawings and scribbles and movie tickets and feathers scotch taped in, and that's been a pretty. I've probably got 80 or 90 or 100 of them over. Some of them little pocket notebooks. If I travel, I always have a hard copy journal with me when I travel. So that's remained the same ever since I was in high school. And then in contrast to that, I have good work ethics now that I probably didn't have then. I'm pretty efficient and pretty, back up my hard drive and show rough drafts around and meet my deadlines. One reason I get published is I meet my deadlines and I answer my email promptly and I'm polite. I say please and thank you to my editors. And if they tell me to make a change, 9 times out of 10, I make a change because it's their press. And if I don't like it, I'll write another book. Like, I do run into writers, my age even, like, their ego is so hung up. Well, I wrote it and they can't change it. Like, oh, get over yourself. Who do you think you are? If you're that good, go publish your own book then. Don't why have an editor?
Self-publishing. So Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
I overindulge in language. I tend to overwrite. Too many metaphors, too many syllables, too many sentences. But I've gotten good at doing the big wow finish, like at the end of a book, where suddenly the sentence might run a page and a half. And this is like Molly's soliloquy in Ulysses or something, to pick one of my literary mentors on this. But I've gotten good at spinning the orchestra, like keep playing. If you ever watch Gustavo Dudamel rehearsing the LA Phil, like he's always like, no, that was only 100%. Oh, that's no. Stop. 100%. What's wrong with you slackers? It has to be 110%. Your blood hasn't come out of your fingers yet. I do it again. And so I can drive myself to this, writing in the middle of the night, knowing I need a big wow finish, knowing that I have a predilection for overwriting. I can overwrite successfully, professionally overwrite, if that makes any sense. If you look at the end of my last 2 essay collections, they both have these big wow finishes with these immense sentences that take us streaming off into the sunset.
Fill in the blank. Anger can be a productive emotion when?
When it motivates you to want to make a change and you're in control of that motivation. Like, you're not just responding, oh, fuck you, asshole, I hate you. Like, but you're like, oh, you're going to do that? Oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to write this and get it published, and I'm going to shut you right down.
Yeah.
I worked at, I worked in the university, in the academia, and there were times when funding got pulled. We don't fund people of color, at this school anymore. It's just the white administrator, in essence. Not that they put that in writing, but that was the message. Like, stop bringing in people of color. Like, oh, you don't want people of color? You're getting nothing but watch me write the memo and the funding grant and go to the trustees. We're having nothing but people of color for the next 5 years. If that's what you're going to be like.
My friend wrote comedy with Robin Williams. I asked him, can satire be destructive? He says, that's the job of satire. But if me and you do a cartoon in another country and they kill us, some people think dying's destructive. So Swift compares satire to a mirror in which people could see every face but their own. What's the function of satire?
No, I agree. It is to tear down the bad enemy, to tear down the bad false idols. It is to be confrontational. Satire has, if it's easy and simple and everyone says, oh, yes, so and so's a big fat jerk, and there's no risk involved, then it's not very interesting as satire. If your satire is so effective that someone puts a fatwa out on you and comes and kills you, that's, to my mind, not success. That's merely a poor reading of audience. So
Yeah.
a successful parody or satire has to leave that audience able to act and think and respond, and leaves me able to continue on and do my work the year after and the year after that. That being a martyr for your cause is usually not a very successful long-term strategy.
What's the most significant difference between men and women, physical aside?
Well, so far in our culture, they're trained to be very different bodies in space, and they're also trained to be very different verbally. So a man is trained, or masculinized figure. It could be someone who's adopting a male gender. We're gendered, I should say. So not sex, but we're gendered. For a man is supposed to be blunt, direct, aggressive. That movie sucks, right? That's a man thing, and women are typically gendered to say, that movie wasn't very nice. What do you think, dear?
Yeah.
Right? We come at it through different ways. Now, I'd like to think that's going to change in time, or is changing right now. But how we manifest our physical body, our verbal bodies, is highly culture driven at this particular point in time. I'm trained to be a man a certain way, trained by every movie I've ever seen, every song I've ever seen, every baseball game I ever played, blah, blah, blah.
You used this word earlier. What caused matriarchy?
Well, matriarchy is a choice, just like patriarchy is a choice, just like, communal living is a choice. And I certainly think matriarchy makes sense, since the woman is producing the offspring that's going to keep the village intact. And since initially we're going into caves to find resources and to find protection from animals or protection from the rain. So if a woman's physical body is cave-like in its openings, vulva, if the cave opening is a vulva, then of course I should worship the opening and the people with the openings, the Venus of Willendorf, or whatever artistic example I want to say. That makes sense. Patriarchy is the one that doesn't make nearly as much sense. Like, you're going to be angry and attack everything and urinate on everything. Why is that going to be a good way to have a society?
There's a line that goes, you create what you resist. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into, you are what you hate. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing. Your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So I'm curious your thoughts on that line, you create what you resist. I'm not saying you, Charles, but one creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that line?
Well, Buñuel was being funny. He knew, he was being humorous in that. And that's a surrealist thing, right? We always try to, if I'm an atheist, I'm going to bring in some God to be an atheist about it. Joyce is different in that, of course, Catholicism is limiting, in his mind, restricting every aspect of his language, his culture, his physical being, his ability to be sexual. He didn't marry his wife until the last possible minute, after a lifetime of common law marriage. So I get where he's coming from when he's pushing back against Catholicism. But again, I'll say, you don't have to be oppositional to come up with a great song or a great, right? You can be celebratory, not celibate, but celebratory. And you could be in a society of peace, love, and harmony and still make art. So that we are oppositional is Western European last couple hundred years kind of idea. Whoever wrote, we could pick a waltz, a Viennese waltz. They weren't really being oppositional. They're just making a living and giving people what they want to hear.
Beautiful. You're a good listener. I appreciate that. These are 5 quick Alan Watts questions off the top of your head in just a couple words. 1, who started it all?
The Big Bang.
2, are we going to make it?
Yes.
3, where do we put it?
Someplace safe and shielded from radiation.
4, who's cleaning it up?
Women of color. Women of color making minimum wage or less.
Is it serious?
Of course, life is serious. Even jokes, even satire is serious. It's just deliciously funny. National Lampoon, is a funny magazine. It's just also deadly serious.
Yeah. That's Gurdjieff said, laughter is a reconciliation of yes and no. What's the function of laughter?
It creates bonding, right? If you can get everybody laughing, I go out and do a talk, and I try to make people laugh at the beginning.
Yeah.
Certainly I always thank them for coming and that kind of thing, but it buys you tolerance, and it creates community. You can't be mad at people if you're laughing with them.
Yeah, because McLuhan loved to quote Steve Allen, behind every joke, there's a grievance. Even just drop the word every. Behind the jokes, there's a grievance. Any thought?
Sure, it's jokes are ways that we release our tension. So just kidding. When you said something snarky, well, you wanted to say something snarky, and you're going to pretend it was a joke. It wasn't, but nonetheless, you're trying to relieve an anxiety by expressing it that way.
How do you find peace of mind?
I go for a walk.
Yeah.
Hey, y'all, turn off your phone. Stop watching the internet. Watch this program. This is a good program. But other than this, don't watch anything else. And just go for a walk.
We watched Network the other night, and he's there. Turn your TV off. I'm like, this is a great movie. Yeah. Then my friend said, that movie was not satire. And I was like, yeah, it was. Okay, if Charles, you're walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
I would love if I could give that 12-year-old some self-love. I just internalized a lot of narratives that just simply weren't true about worthlessness, and I'd been sexually abused, and there's lots of ways that my parents could have handled it. They didn't handle it in a very healthy or nice way, that's for sure. And so the last kid picked on the baseball team, all that kind of stuff. I just want to tell him, you are fine. And all those little assholes that won't put you on the team, you don't care. You don't like baseball anyway. They probably shouldn't put you on the team. You're gonna screw it up. Go read a book. Go be happy.
Hollis Frampton said, narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Can you forget to die?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the French say that sex is the little death. No, it isn't. It's the one time that you're out of your narrative, right?
Yeah.
And what is a narrative? That's a cultural construct. Obviously different cultures tell stories in different kinds of ways with different cadences and different delivery mechanisms. So that we have a story and that it has a narrative is simply our Western European way of telling a story.
Utah Phillips says, anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Whoever has the power. If you don't like it, get some power. I'm not going to listen to you if you don't have some way of enforcing some mechanism to enforce your power on me.
Well, it's funny because etymologically, the word freedom is exactly what Utah said, making one's rules for one's own self. What does freedom mean to you now?
I do agree with, that I'm free because I have relatively few social concerns. I have relatively few, I've got some financial concerns, but they're trivial compared to everybody else. But mostly I have a sense of self that it's just you can say a bad word to me in the supermarket, or you can, deny me service, but I'm sorry, I'm over here living my life. I know who I am right now. Thinking as a white person, I've been to sub-Saharan Africa 10 times. And there's where being white can be the opposite of good. It's, you're the last person who's going to get through the visa line because they're going to help all the Africans first. It's, that makes sense kind of thing. And you can treat me badly, but I'm not going to, I didn't colonize your country. I'm sorry you're mad at white people, but as soon as you're ready, give me my visa and I'm going to move on and go to the hotel. So as you get older, you get a better sense of self.
Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Over. There's no question about that. And and that was an Archie Bunker where he says, what meathead put the toilet paper on the wrong way?
Well, the patent is 100 years old and it has to go over. But 80% of people say over. The people who say under have their reasons. That's the thing.
Yeah, but they're wrong.
Like McLuhan said, my whole fallacy is wrong. Okay, so if a publisher was going to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Wow, still alive.
They want to scent, the glue, and the binding. What smell?
Vanilla, like fresh cookies.
I love it. If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed, and what would it be made of?
Oh, granite, and put it in the forest where nobody's going to find it. But if you do find it, it's like, wow, why is this statue here in the forest?
Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Lobster.
Never had it, never want it.
Right. It just seems like a big cockroach, a big red cockroach from the ocean. Like, thanks, but no thanks.
If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
You duck because it's inevitable. Ducking is instinctual, right? And so I get more vomit. Like, I'm already up to my neck in vomit. Getting more on me from ducking from the shit isn't going to be a problem.
Yeah. Tell me the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you.
I'm surprised sometimes at the amount of effort people put into opposing the current regime, given that it is so easy just to let it go. And so, like, going to a rally and knowing you're going to get potentially arrested and there's no bathrooms and the trains are going to be crowded. I'm thinking of, like, in Los Angeles, they have no king rallies, and people, it's not easy to get to Los Angeles because there's no parking and the trains are going to be crowded coming in if you come on public transit. And I'm encouraged by the old-fashioned stomping kind of down of the man authoritarianism, anti-authoritarianism that we've had, kind of lost sight of since the 60s. So it's still here. Yay.
This is about the word archive. Etymologically, it came from 1400, keep safe, free from harm. But 200 years later, it was what we think of an archive, record preserved as evidence. But it was Charles Baudelaire said, if you try to make a statement long, deep, and rich, it will age very fast. If you try and only own the day you're talking, it will last forever. So we both come from an era of 60s where we studied Eastern philosophy, live in the moment, be here now. Why do we have to save all this crap, boxes of stuff, when the whole point of life is to live in the moment? Now, I know I go to the library every day. I know the value of preserving stuff, but I also respect the futurist of Italian movement said destroy all the museums and libraries. Not that I'm saying to do that, but I'm glad that someone aired that. Wyndham Lewis said, artists live in the moment, live in the present, and write a detailed history of the future. It's about two main questions. Is archiving more innate or more invented? And do you have plans for your own archive?
Archive is invented. It's a choice that we make as a society, and I'm glad we make that choice. And to get back to your earlier question, you live in the moment partly by having the educational foundation to live in the moment, and you get that educational foundation by being able to study archives. Archives include rough drafts, and so you get to see what people did wrong before they did it right. I'm glad that we have the rough draft to TSLA's The Wasteland, and we get to see Ezra Pound's kind of comments. I'm in half a dozen archives in a low-key kind of way. Like, I corresponded with Person X or a project I was affiliated with. The archives got housed, but all my journals, these 90 journals that I have, some are kind of cool. Some have got some interesting pages, but what happens to them? Who knows? Burn them for fuel when the power goes out and we're all living in the Stone Age again, I guess. Sell them for $10 at a swap meet. Do whatever you want to do, y'all. I'm speaking to my kids. Hey, kids, they're yours. Do what you want. They're nothing. I'm not worried about myself. Myself isn't on those pages.
This is a question Proust posed, on what occasion do you lie? And I'll just set it up. Wordsworth said, poetry is thoughts that do often lie too deep, even for tears. Eartha Kitt said, truth is a theory that is constantly being disproved. Only lies, it seems, go on forever. On what occasion do you lie?
I think it's useful to be kind. And so, that's that classic, does this dress make me look fat? Or, or do you think I'm going to get a job? Like, sure, you're going to get a job, little boy. Like you don't want to say, like, odds are you're going to hate your job. Odds are you're going to have a shitty marriage. Like, that's not doing anybody any harm. So am I lying? Yeah, I know I'm lying. Yeah, the dress makes you look fat because you are fat. But there's no point in the person asking that already knows that they're fat. And so what they're asking you is, say something kind to me, please, because I need a little bit of boost. So sure, that dress looks so good on you. I love that color. Matches your eyes, dear.
You are a smart man. We've got about 6 more minutes, Charles. This has been a delight, and I really appreciate it. I want to go back to writing for a second. Um, this is Milan Kundera, Unbearable Lightness of Being. This is why I love writing, because the character I'm writing about can go further than I can. Yeah, right. If I write a character on this piece of paper, how can the character go further? That sounds like it's over romanticizing.
Well, who said he wasn't romanticizing, right? For all his bleak existentialism, that's not to say that Milan Kundera wasn't a romantic at heart. And that's
Yeah.
that argument that romanticism hasn't, sure, it was like a literary movement from 1810 to 1830, but it's still, there's plenty of arguments. The Beats were highly romantic. They were worshiping Blake, but I mean, just even that idea of the self. So Milan Kundera, for all your existential Eastern European bleakness and all your cigarettes and all those cobblestones, maybe you were a romantic after all. And in any case, you can project yourself on the page with a better ending, a better, you're deeper, smaller, you're deeper, wiser, more handsome, more fucked up. You could go the other way. I really want to be a spectacular failure. I'll write that instead. I'm a mediocre failure right now. I'll be a spectacular failure on the page. Watch me write it.
That's Frank Zappa's line I love is, I'm a failure, but I'm not a miserable failure.
So he went to high school where I taught, where I live in the Antelope Valley. And then of course he went to Los Angeles, lived in Laurel Canyon. So we wanted to have him come back and be the keynote speaker at the Antelope Valley College. And people even knew him, who had gone to high school with him. And there was nothing that would bring him back to his childhood town, like no amount of money in the world. And when we were talking about it, someone who went to high school with him and when he was still alive said, he was weird then and he's weird now. Weird now. So Frank Zappa was a personality in high school, apparently.
I had the privilege of working for him for 10 years, so we could talk about Zappa forever, but it's like this. Steve Martin loved to quote David Mamet. Art is a product of the unconscious mind. The neuroscientists say we're 80% operating unconsciously. I'd say for the last 90 minutes, we've been very conscious. What's your take on art as the product of the unconscious mind?
There's no way for me to disprove that because if it's coming from the unconscious, by the time I'm conscious of it, I can't be aware of where it came from. There might be some truth to the idea that certainly I have a sense of right and wrong, like I will say, not in a moral sense, but I mean an artistic sense, like that line doesn't work. And often I can't articulate why. It's a little too loud or a little bit too self-evident, or there's something about it that just is off. Frank O'Hara has that poem, Why I'm Not a Painter. And he's quoting the painter that he's working with, like the painter put some words in the painting and then takes them out. He says it was just too much. So is that the unconscious that's helping us do that framing, that editing? Or is that merely a very well-informed consciousness that it is not articulating itself very clearly? I don't have an answer to that. Maybe you do. You've done more of these than I have.
Well, no, I'm forever quoting John Cage. That's a very good question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer. But here's a couple, and then we'll close out very soon. Elmore Leonard said the job of the writer is to get the reader to the next sentence. And the poet critic Helen Vendler says, I write to explain things to myself.
Yeah, Helen Vendler is not my fan. I'm not a fan of Helen Vendler, but more so Elmore Leonard. But all those things are, there's no reason they can't all be true simultaneously. Just like is light a particle or a wave? Well, it depends on how we measure it. So is Helen Vendler writing for herself? Of course she is. She's also writing for the MLA, and she's also writing for her tenure committee, and she's also writing to teach her graduate students how to write, and all these things are happening at the same time, and they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, it goes back to Zappa again. He loved to quote this word he didn't invent called wavicle. It's waves and particles,
Yeah.
Like the snake eating its tail. What's a question that remains unresolved for you?
I truly don't know what to do with beauty, and I see beauty. I wrote a book actually called "The Joy of Ugly Nature." Was part of the book title. I respond to classical high romantic, the high romanticism and of the sublime of Yosemite at dawn kind of thing, or the rose window of Notre Dame before it burned down. I haven't been to the new Notre Dame, the old Notre Dame. I respond to beauty, but I also do think that there can be forgotten areas of landscape that are just as beautiful as Yosemite, but I haven't figured out a successful way to navigate exactly, is Yosemite equally beautiful to the dirt lot, or is it slightly better than the dirt lot, but the dirt lot's pretty good? And what I write about is not necessarily what I feel in my heart of hearts on that one, the joy of ugly nature. Because I think if he said for the next 50 years you can only be one place, I'd rather be in Yosemite than in the dirt lot.
Yeah.
But that's contradictory to my own thesis of my own book, So I haven't resolved that tension.
Well, that's Duchamp says, I'm going to contradict myself so I don't conform to my own ideas.
Yeah, and do I contradict myself? Says Walt Whitman. Very well. Then I contradict myself.
No,
so what?
exactly.
So what?
Yeah, so what? But back to, I left one out that I forgot I wanted to really get you to address for a second. And I was talking to this guy who went to high school with Bob Dylan. Then he worked as a road manager, and he was a really fun interview. And he said someone told him the difference between narrative and storytelling is that narrative does not lie. So any thoughts on the difference between narrative and storytelling and this line, narrative doesn't lie?
No, I think it's the other way around. Story doesn't lie. The core dynamic between the hero, the anti-hero, and what's going to happen to him, that is the plot and the story. That's the core, Little Red Riding Hood or the Chavot Cave or whatever it's going to be. And narrative is how we construct that and present it to an audience, either through a Dylan song or through a movie or through, James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. The narrative is going to be the artificial construct that is embellishing the core story inside of it. Says me.
That is good, Charles. You're fun. Okay. How has writing shaped your behavior?
I hear and see language more than I probably did if I hadn't become a writer. And so I inhabit irony because signs can be hilariously funny and stupid. And
Yeah.
I'm interested in the cadence of people's spoken language, probably more than the content of what they're saying to me. How are they saying it? And I'm listening for that dialogue because it's just interesting. So I participate in the world now probably differently than a painter does, or a musician does, or a dancer, or a NBA star, or somebody like that, or a financier, a banker.
Thornton Wilder in 1928 said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
Truly, I don't mean to sound like a pretentious jerk, even though I may. Language doesn't leave me alone. Like, I hear language and I need to deal with it. It's often frustrating because, as I mentioned before, like the rabbit running down the trail and I can't catch up with it. But I hear language even when I'm trying to go to bed, even when I don't want to, even when I'm cooking dinner. And I have the self-control to cook dinner and not run back to my computer and write some meaningless bullshit. But nonetheless, I inhabit language in a very nonstop, present kind of way. It has weight. Language has weight to me, and a taste and a texture the same way sunlight has weight.
Beautiful. What gives you the most optimism?
I look at society and I can see lots of people being nice to everybody else, including at four-way stops in my neighborhood, which is well armed. I live in a very heavily gunnified part of America where, we're more red than blue. And yet when people come to cars come up, you go ahead of me, is more often happening than not. And I think that's amazing because I live in a racially mixed neighborhood too, Hispanic, Black. We might not get along at the picnic table, but we can manage to get along at the four-way stop. So yay, there's proof of our ability to be surviving cooperative human beings.
It's well articulated, man. You are concise and articulate and really fun. You taught me a lot. I'm really grateful. The first question I asked is, what's the best thing for a human being? Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being. And the last question I asked is, what gives you the most optimism? When they asked Groucho Marx that at the end of his life, he said, other people. It's sure been fun spending this time with another person, especially because it was you, Charles. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Namaste, Holy Spirit. It's been lovely to spend the day with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you to our audience. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking. We can keep talking.